and welcome to Microsoft Envision, presented with Accenture and Avanade. Thank you for joining the Americas broadcast of Episode 3. I'm Mariana, and I'm so happy to be with you today as your host. In today's episode, we have some amazing speakers who will touch on different areas of business and technology, helping us answer the question, how will agility help my organization compete to win? We have subject matter experts ready in the chat, so join in the conversation. We want to hear from you. So be sure to answer those polling questions because we'll be checking in live with updates throughout the show. In fact, moments ago, we posted our first question, which asks, do you agree with this statement? Is my organization an agile organization? We'll take a look at the results a little later in the show. And don't forget, if you're watching our live stream on LinkedIn today, you can jump over to join us at envision.microsoft.com to access the chat, those poll questions, and all of the resources for today's program. Now, to kick us off, I want to turn it over to our very own Alyssa Taylor to hear about the 5 trends reshaping the world and how agility is key to how organizations respond. Alyssa, you're always so energetic, so on point. We can't wait to hear from you.
Thanks, Mariana. 2 years ago, nearly to the day, I had the pleasure of speaking to a Microsoft Envision audience in Sydney, Australia. After my talk, I got to meet with many of the attendees to learn about the industries they were hoping to disrupt. Mariana, back to you.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. We are optimistic too. Thank you for explaining those 5 trends and really bringing them home, from cheesecakes to cars to mattresses. We will touch on several of these topics throughout today's episode. And here at Envision, we want to also innovate. We're bringing in live experts, Josh Klein, CEO of Indigo Metrics and co-host of Accenture's Built for Change podcast, coming in live from Iceland, and Cheryl Dorsey, founder and CEO of The Plug from Atlanta, Georgia. Cheryl is a journalist who also shares my alma mater, Columbia University Journalism School. Shout out. And Cheryl, I actually want to start with you because we're celebrating Black History Month, and I want to ask you how you are observing and celebrating this very important month.
Well, thank you, my fellow J School sister. Black History Month is such a rich texture of celebrating American history here in the United States as well as Canada. And as I have recently launched my book, Upper Hand, The Future of Work for the Rest of Us, it is truly honoring my grandfather who hopped off the bus from Detroit in the 1950s, landed in Seattle and worked for Boeing, and also my journey through technology, getting a chance to work with the Technology Access Foundation in high school under the leadership of Trish Malines-DeZico, who retired as a software engineer from Microsoft and taught kids how to code. And that helped me land my first internships in high school at Microsoft. So I'm very grateful for those opportunities and for those leaders who I celebrate this month.
Thank you for sharing those very important stories with us. Upper Hand, Cheryl's book, is available now. Be sure to check it out. And Josh, now I want to bring you in. Alyssa highlighted all of these trends that are reshaping our industries. What resonated more to you from this keynote?
One of the things that really struck me was that wow factor and how it's having such an enormous impact on consumers, but it's equally much having an impact on our employees. You can't just send out a memo anymore and expect all your employees to change their behavior. You have to engage them the same way, using those same technologies, and that's a huge opportunity.
The wow factor is definitely making that change. Cheryl, I want to bring you in now. Is there anything that wasn't mentioned that you are seeing on the ground and with your own business?
That's such a great question. I totally echo Josh around that wow factor. And I think that actually Jill and Alyssa spoke to this around communicating those values around sustainability no longer being an option. And as consumers and even through our own business, the storytelling around how we're making choices around caring for our planet, caring for each other, especially during these times. So that for me really, really points out and something that we have to drive home in these times.
And it's a responsibility that we all share. We're going to be touching on the issue of sustainability a little later in the show, more in depth. Josh, to you now, we saw several examples, as I mentioned, from mattresses to cars. Do they have broader applicability in your view?
I mean, yeah, the underpinning it all is adaptability, right? Like there's no one watching today that hasn't had to make some changes in the last couple of years that they may not have expected to have to make. And that's a trend that's just continuing. The good news is that while we've faced a lot of challenges, we're also now armed with much better tools. We've got better opportunities. So it's up to us to seize them.
I was also really struck by Alyssa mentioning just the advancement that has been made in the last 2 years vis-a-vis the last 2 decades. Sherelle, what do you see in the years going forward after what we've just experienced worldwide?
I think that this was definitely the last 2 years spelled stress testing so much of our technology, our systems, the way that we function as organizations, and also the way in which we govern our organizations when it comes to employee culture. And with that stress test, it has allowed us to know that we can become more agile. We have the tools to do so, and we can still enable opportunities for employees to jump in to help support. And so I think as we look ahead, that agility is continuing that momentum in an upward motion, and we're going to benefit from that greatly, both as leaders, both as organizations, as well as the consumers who will ultimately reap the benefits of that agility and innovation.
So agility, the key word here, is one of the main themes of our show. And I want to go to a poll question that we posted to our audience because I want you guys to respond to that. And that question asked your response to the following statement: is my organization an agile organization? We have almost 50% of respondents, these results are coming in live all over the Americas, saying that they somewhat agree that their organization is agile. Coming in at second place, but with a large gap, people saying that they strongly agree that their organization is agile. But I want to get, Josh, to you first, just your reaction to this. Almost half of the people watching the show right now in the Americas think that their companies are somewhat agile. Your reaction?
I mean, to be honest, it's a little bit mind-blowing if you look at what that poll would have said 2 years ago, right? And what it tells me is that companies are starting to get the hint, right? Like, okay, yeah, change is needed, adaptability is needed. And apparently people are seeing it. That's great.
And throughout the show, we're going to equip our viewers into how they can respond with more agility. Sherelle, Josh, I'm going to ask you guys to stick around because we're going to keep coming back to you later in the show. Now, as we discussed, workforce empowerment is top of mind for those frontline workers with the right tools, the right knowledge. They need to be safe and successful has really never been more important. And that leads us to our next polling question that is now posted in the chat. How well has your organization responded to changing workplace conditions over the past 2 years? We'll check in on those results a little later in the show. And now to discuss this subject of frontline workers and Microsoft's Work Trends Index, let's bring in Colette Stahlbaumer. So the pandemic has been hard on everyone, but perhaps no one more than those who didn't have the option to work from home, right? The 2 billion frontline workers who represent 80% of the global workforce. Now, Microsoft's Work Trends Index looked at that segment in particular. Any findings that stand out to you? And firstly, could you briefly define what constitutes a frontline worker for our audience?
Yes, thanks, Mariana. Yes, this was such an interesting study to take a look, especially at the frontline workforce.
So are a lot of frontline workers scared or having difficulty adapting to these technological changes? And what does the future success look like going forward in that respect for you?
The goal of technologies is to make life a little easier, right?
No, and also what you said, that the fact that frontline workers are optimistic about technology, that seems to be a big change.
Yes, they're hungry for the opportunities that it brings, and they're also hungry for the training, right? To help them understand how to use that technology to help them do their best work. So, as leaders, it's really important to prioritize this. And as we talked about, be agile, right? To be able to adjust those priorities as conditions change and, make space for learning at scale. Being more intentional about the training and the technology adoption and the ways you get the technology adopted can lower the barrier to entry for frontline workers and help them gain those new experiences where they'll grow in their skill set and in a new direction. And we know this has not only an impact on the bottom line, but in their own lives and in their willingness to stay committed to your company and its mission in a big way.
So thank you so much, Colette. We here at Envision, we're left very optimistic after this conversation.
Thank you.
Now let's take a look at the results from the polling question we posted at the start of that conversation. The question asked, how well has your organization responded to changing workplace conditions over the past 2 years? These results are coming in live all over the Americas, and it looks like the majority of you are saying that your organizations have been highly responded. I don't think we've ever had an over 70% response rate in our show to a question. That means that there is no doubt that you have to adapt and you have to remain as agile as possible as organizations and as leaders. It's honestly great to see so much interest in supporting employee engagement and being better at communicating with each other. Now, one emerging technology that offers promise to transform the way organizations connect and collaborate with employees is extended reality. So listen, rather than just talk about it, we wanted to take you inside it to give you an inside look at Accenture's internal metaverse, which they've called the nth floor. Now, the avatars you'll see in a moment are actually all employees from Accenture joining a meeting wearing virtual reality headsets. But before we dive into that, we like to hear what you have to say on this topic with the next question. And this asks, what area do you think your organization will benefit from the most by leveraging the metaverse? And with that, I'll just hand it over to Accenture's Jason Warnke. Jason.
Here we go. Like we've heard from Microsoft, we at Accenture recognize we're at a very special time as it relates to our workforce. The metaverse is here in the enterprise, and we just have to embrace it and help define what that future looks like in our particular companies. Thank you for all your time today. Hopefully this was helpful and exciting. Back to you, Mariana.
Thank you, Jason. I was actually able to try the technology here at Accenture before going live on the show, and it's pretty cool. I want to bring back Cheryl and Josh, our experts. So Cheryl, let me start with you. Do you see any real life uses to this technology that are being deployed now?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love the metaverse. I am all about the VR, the extended reality. I love how companies and conferences made the transition early on as the pandemic started to sweep our nation to the metaverse, to keep that connectivity, to keep the information flowing, to keep the recruiting efforts up, and just switching to these virtual environments that allowed people to create these fascinating avatars and still engage with each other. And we're even seeing that play out online as folks are creating virtual co-working spaces in the metaverse to work collaboratively, especially as so many of us are working from home, still having an environment where you can have that sort of water cooler moment with other colleagues.
And I want to go back to the conversation that we had before with Colette. Josh, I want to bring you in on that because, we saw the Work Trends Index and how this disruption is affecting frontline workers. Just tell me your thoughts on that. And is the metaverse potentially going to play a role here, you think?
Well, it's going to have to, right? I mean, we've seen that connecting corporate values to actual behaviors empowers employees when you're communicating the message behind it. When you get into a virtual environment, you suddenly have a whole world in which to stage that communication. So I think it's a real opportunity for companies to step up and say, look, we have a variety of different things that we want to bring together to talk about. Here's a place that we can actually do it.
Cheryl, what are your thoughts on the conversation with Colette and, the fear that some employees have about the new technology, but also the optimism and how frontline workers are being affected by all this?
Absolutely. I mean, let's be honest, adapting to new technology and working in a new way is always hard when it first happens. But we are so now adept to using our smartphones for running almost every single thing in our lives. Really, I think it comes down to the training, the management that's offered, a little bit of that hand holding. And again, I love that Colette really talked about that sense of care. Workers really wanting to know that you care about them and creating that environment where they feel 100% comfortable that they can actually adopt the technology to help them do their jobs better and with ease.
And the importance of culture. As she said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Josh, you are also the CEO of Indigo Metrics. You host a podcast. How do you see these trends playing out in your organization?
Well, it's more critical than ever before. If you can't get your employees behind your culture, again, it really doesn't matter what your strategy is. So again, as you look at these different platforms, there are opportunities to engage those employees where and when and how they need it. You can use virtual environments for one-on-ones that feel a little more conversational. You can have socializing opportunities that feel a little less formal. Again, it's a bunch of ways. It's a really rich environment in which you can do some of that messaging, do some of that enculturating activity in a way that's more natural.
I know it's still early days of this technology, but Sherelle, where do you see this going in the future, in the next couple of years?
I continue to see more of our public spaces having a blend of metaverse engagement as well as community building across the board. And this is, inside of work, outside of work. I even think about my family reunion potentially being in the metaverse one day, just for fun, but definitely something that we're all becoming much more comfortable with. And also the technology expanding so that it is much more accessible to those, again, that typically are not the most technologically advanced or adapt, but things that they can easily access.
Listen, be sure to invite me to Thanksgiving at your house, please. I want to bring in
our
live polling results. Of course. I want to bring in our live polling results because we actually posed a question to our audience here in the Americas broadcast. In what area do you think your organization will first deploy the metaverse? And it looks like the majority are saying collaborating virtually. And coming in at second place with almost 25% of results, enhancing virtual learning. Experts, I want to get your take on this. Josh.
Honestly, I'm a little surprised that attracting talent is so low, just because from where I'm sitting and some of the customers that we talk to, that's a huge opportunity. Again, given the great reshuffle, employees are looking at other options, and where better to get to know your company than in an environment that feels more real.
Sherelle, your thoughts looking at these polling results. Are you surprised as well?
Just a tad bit. I definitely thought that I would see virtual learning be a bit higher on the spectrum here. I think the other component here as well is overall accessibility for employees that may not be able to engage in person overall due to potential disabilities or having to be a caregiver for a loved one. I think there's additional opportunities here beyond just the collaborative opportunity. It really is engaging those employees that maybe could not engage before. So again, I think that there's still some room here for what will happen in the future.
And I love that you touched on the importance of community building and the potential that this has for that. Thank you both. We're going to check back with you again a little later in the show. Now, as we discussed, the global marketplace is rapidly evolving, and the ability to adapt and remain agile is a critical factor, especially for manufacturers seeking to overcome some of the challenges of the current moment. Up next, we'll hear from Avanad's Tom Nall to hear how the Metal Exchange Corporation is managing to expand and exceed growth outlooks during this rapid time of transformation. And we'd like to hear your thoughts on our next polling question, which asks, what's the biggest challenge to your organization in leveraging and deploying cloud-based technologies? And while you answer that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Mariana. I'm here with Tom Markland from Metal Exchange Corporation. And Tom, I'm really excited to talk to you about manufacturing and how Metal Exchange has used agility to win in the marketplace. Metal Exchange started with the simple premise of trading scrap metal regionally. But in the last 5 years, your growth, transformation, and agility has been compelling. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. It's nice to be here, Tom. Metal Exchange is a family owned business that was founded in 1974. And like you said, started as a regional scrap company.
Back to you, Mariana.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tom and Tom. And I love that phrase from Tom Marklin's founder, if you don't go, you don't know. Now, as we heard from Melissa earlier in the show, sustainability no longer optional for organizations, regardless of where they are in their transformation journey. But it is often during this process of transformation that organizations have the greatest opportunity to embed sustainable business practices into their DNA to support responsible growth for the future. Now, to share more on this topic, here's Accenture's Deborah McCormack.
Thank you, Mariana. It is my absolute pleasure to have with me today Adrian Monk, Managing Director at the World Economic Forum.
Gracias, Deborah. Thank you so much, Adrian. Don't look down, look up. And I want to look to our panelists now for their thoughts on this conversation that we just witnessed. Cheryl, I want to start with you. Your thoughts.
I think that, again, sustainability, as we've spoken about throughout the thread of this conversation, is truly at the core of how we continue to move forward. It is part of the innovation conversation. And even when we think about that next generation as it was 10, 15, 20 years ago, when we started to define customers as LOHAS, and part of that CSR sort of framework, those principles are still true today, and they definitely have to be embedded in the framework of how we move forward.
Josh, is sustainability something that you talk about in your podcast? How are people measuring, their success in this realm?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sustainability, it's basically just table stakes now, right? And underpinning it, I think, is a lot of the core of what we've been talking about here today, which is agility. You have to have it in order to capture new markets where you can add value, like we saw with EVs for Metal Exchange, or in creating shared accountability, like Adrian at the World Economic Forum mentioned, which again, you saw with the internal carbon fee at Microsoft. It's being done in a lot of different ways, but I think the important part is that it's being done by the winners.
I'm glad you brought up the conversation with Metal Exchange Corporation, what they're doing. Cheryl, I want to bring you in with that discussion that we saw. Is that applicable to other industries? What are the lessons learned here for other companies?
Yes, absolutely. I think that there can be an intimidation factor here, but I loved some of the key examples and frameworks that were shared in that part of the conversation, where really creating a roadmap and bringing everybody into the canoe, so to speak, to get onto the same framework of what the plan and the strategy is moving forward. That is definitely applicable to across industries. And just again, somewhere as we continue to drive business and the values of sustainability being very, very much important to consumers, we have to have that focus. And internally, we have to get everyone into the canoe.
Get everybody into the canoe, yes. I was actually recently in Davos, in Switzerland, speaking to people who organize the World Economic Forum in Davos. And it's incredible to hear the positive chatter on the ground for creating this event, which is 100% sustainable. But how hard is it to really apply that to other communities and other parts of the world? Josh, and then Cheryl. Josh?
I mean, yes, there's different challenges for different organizational sizes and backgrounds, but I mean, even our company, which is a very small, agile team, fully distributed, we take steps like asking our team members to not use printers at home, to go fully digitalized documents. And it's a small thing, but again, it's something that matters. And I think that it messages out to our customers, and that's how it grows.
Cheryl, what about you? What other everyday examples have you seen or challenges?
Yes, I definitely echo what Josh has said here, where making those kind of small changes in behaviors, embedding those into company culture, it really gets folks thinking about, well, how do I also become more minimalist and create simple processes and systems that allow me to be much more sustainable, down to even our business mailing boxes, and ensuring that we are creating more digital versions of the paperwork that we need, even through the onboarding process, or even as we distribute swag to team members, ensuring we're purchasing locally, ensuring that the principles of the vendors that we're using have the values and part of the mission that we all share. So there's simple ways that we can be great citizens just within our sort of own neighborhoods.
So I want to actually take the pulse of the people now, because earlier on in the show, we posted a poll question for folks to answer throughout the Americas. And that question asked, how do you think a sustainable business framework would have the greatest impact on your organization? And the majority of respondents are saying that improving company culture and transparency is where they would see the greatest impact. Coming in second place is ensuring operational excellence. Once more, we see that emphasis on culture. Josh, I want to get your reaction to this poll.
I absolutely love it. The fact that the people that are answering the poll recognize it's not just about satisfying some nebulous customer. This is something that matters to us, to all of us. And it's, especially as you mentioned earlier, the Great Reshuffle, it's just critical.
Do these results surprise you, Sherelle?
Honestly, the top two results do not surprise me. I was hoping to see a little bit more lift there in the attracting and retaining talent. I think as we talk about improving company culture as well as transparency, these core values are very, very fascinating and very attractive to those who are looking to work for organizations that walk their talk and can demonstrate that in very tangible and measurable ways. And so I do hope to see some of those improvements and some evidence for that talent retention as well as attraction.
Thank you so much, Sherelle, Josh Klein, for your valuable insights. You are friends of Envision, and we certainly hope to have you back here on the show.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
So we've spoken about transformation during today's episode and some of the ways that organizations can think about adopting agility to optimize business processes and operations to be resilient and to drive growth. And we'd like to hear from you on this subject with our next polling question, which asks, which of the following tactics would help make your organization more agile? It is our last poll question, so be sure to submit your results. And for organizations to be truly agile, of course, they also need to enable employees the ability to work in more nimble and more entrepreneurial ways. And to hear more about this, let's turn it over to Microsoft's Amy Hood. Amy?
Thanks, Mariana. I'm so delighted to be joined by my friend and colleague, Reid Hoffman, today. Reid, thank you very much. I really appreciated it. Back to you, Mariana.
What a great conversation for us to end the show on. Reid, Amy, we certainly learned so much from the both of you on why it's so important to establish this entrepreneurial culture, right? And I love that you touched on trust being the foundation of everything. Now let's take a look at how you responded to our last polling question, which talked about the tactics, right, that would help your organization be more agile. Let's see. Last take on the pulse of the people. Most of you going back to this idea of learning, embracing continuous learning, coming in with over 40% of respondents, and then supporting agile decision making, that idea of agility, the theme of our show, coming in second. And don't forget, with embracing continuous learning, and I love the majority of you said that because Reid and Amy talked about it a lot. And with that comes failure, and with that comes also this idea of trust and trusting the leaders that will enable you and give you the tools to continue to learn. It was so great to continue to hear from all of you throughout our show. For those that might want to join peers from other parts of the world, we'll re-air this episode later today during APAC and EMEA business hours. Now, our team, you've seen it, we're working hard to prepare these discussions on trends, insights and what you need to know to stay ahead. So don't miss an action-packed episode 4 of Microsoft Envision. We'll be back live in April as we look at ways that your organization can accelerate innovation. Help us spread the word by telling your colleagues, telling your peers to register at envision.microsoft.com. And we also want to hear your feedback to improve future episodes. So please complete the brief survey using the evaluation link at the top right of this page. Until next time, my friends, merci beaucoup, muchas gracias. Thank you so much for joining us.